Alright, I am back with another video, and today we finally have the Minsc build for patch 8. And this is going to be kind of a fun one, because as soon as I saw Giant Barbarian, I knew that I wanted Minsc to be suplexing people. The problem is that comes as a level 10 ability, so how was I going to justify getting that while still making a fun and interesting build? And I think I've got it. You see, I think Minsc, after being freed from the clutches of the Absolute under the Stone Lord moniker, I think he would take a chance to go to the circus to try and, get over, the slight bit of depression he has in the back of his mind after realizing exactly what he did while he was under the influence of the tadpole. And as such, I think he would take a little bit of a spin on the prize wheel, as to which he is clearly being scammed by the Djinn. And as such, in the background, we see Jaheira and Astarion watching on. Jaheira lamenting that Minsc is about to blow all of our gold on a scam, and as such, she tells Astarion to go and steal the ring that the Djinn is using to manipulate the wheel. Astarion, after a few quips, does so, allowing Minsc to win, which of course enrages the Djinn and gets Minsc teleported away to a far-off land, in which, after he kind of scours that other world for a while, he comes across a legendary weapon, the Nalruna. And as such, he takes this upon himself to reinvent himself, to use this legendary weapon for good, to send this trident flying straight into the eyes of his enemies, just as his legendary miniature space hamster Boo once taught him to do, to always go for the eyes. And as such, because the name of the Stone Lord was used as an object of terror while he was working for the criminal gangs again under the Absolute, he decides to take on a new name, the Storm Lord, in order to set things right. It's a temporary name for now, as he would like to go back to being the Stone Lord at some point, but if he thinks until the Neverbrain is kind of dealt with, it makes a bit more sense to go for something different. So yeah, that is kind of the lore and background behind this build and my justification for making it. Now, let's just see how many things we can suplex, kick in the face, and spear straight through with some damn powerful thunder-based attacks. Let's get into the build. First off, we are going to be kicking things off as a Barbarian today. This is just going to give us all the weapon and armor proficiencies that we want right off the bat. If I suppose it doesn't really matter what class you start with, you're pretty much going to get what we need anyway. Moving on, we also get Rage as well, which is going to be great, making us a bit tankier and doing extra damage, as well as an armor defense, which I did end up using for this build, but I'll be discussing some armor-based variants that you can use if you wish towards the end. Moving on to our ability scores, pretty standard spread here. Strength is at 17. You already know that we're going to be using Tavern Brawler for this build because it's just, you can't not use Tavern Brawler here. It's just free extra damage that makes sense for what it's essentially going to be. Yes, another throwing Barbarian build, but one that has purpose and actually feels pretty fun to use. Next up is Dexterity at 14. I would like this a bit higher, but overall it is fine. It'll do enough for both unarmored defense and medium armor if you decide to go down that route, so that's why it's here. Constitution is at 16 to give us a decent pool of HP and to help with our Constitution-based unarmed defense. Intelligence and Charisma are both at 8. We don't really need either of them. Minsc isn't exactly known for being the most intelligent person, nor is he known for being the most charismatic. Don't get me wrong, he's an absolute blast in a conversation, but his words aren't exactly going to be twisting the minds of nobles towards his favour, shall we say. And finally, Wisdom is at 10, just because it helps a little bit with those nasty saving throws. Moving on to our skill proficiencies, we've got Animal Handling and Survival from Minsc's background, and we have Persuasion because he is a human, so he comes with Persuasion built in, which I think makes sense for him. We're also going to be able to grab Athletics and Intimidation. Intimidation is a fun one just to have, just in case it kind of works, even though we do have a lower Charisma, as well as Athletics is needed for some of our abilities on this build, so we do need to take this. Otherwise, you can take Perception instead for your other skill proficiency. Right, that's level 1. Moving on to level 2, we are going to gain access to Danger Sense, giving us advantage on dexterity saving throws against traps, spells, and surfaces. The spell being the most important here, but not slipping on grease or ice is also very good, but this does also allow us to tank things like Fireball pretty effectively. We're also going to get Reckless Attack, which allows you, until your next turn, gain an advantage on attack rolls, but enemies will also have advantage against you. This is just a fun ability that's going to help us. I suppose there is an option to take Great Weapon Master on this build if you want to, in which case that can help, but otherwise we're not going to be needing this so much, just on the off chance we get an unlucky roll. At Barbarian level 3, we get to choose our subclass, and of course, we're going to be going with Giant Barbarian today. Giant Barbarian is going to increase our carrying capacity, which is awesome because we're a human as Minsc, which means this guy is pretty much going to carry everything for us. We're going to get Giant's Might, Giant's Rage, I should say, allowing our Rage to now cause us to increase in size and allow our damage bonus to be applied double on throw attacks. So now that +2 that we get on our rage attacks will be a +4 when we throw, as well as gaining that same usual resistance. Overall, pretty fun ability, makes Minsc feel larger than life, which, let's be honest, he is. We're also going to gain access to Thaumaturgy, giving us advantage on intimidation and performance checks, so even with our lower charisma, it's still worth taking that intimidation proficiency because we can get advantage on the roll, which is going to feel just perfect for Minsc. At Barbarian level 4, we're going to gain access to our first feat of the build, and of course, we're going to be playing Tavern Brawler straight away. Now, because you get Minsc so late in the game, as far as I understand, by default he comes at level 11, so really, it doesn't matter kind of what order you take the levels in here, as you're pretty much going to be max level with Minsc by the time you pick him up. So we can just grab Tavern Brawler early here and not have to worry. At Barbarian level 5, we're going to gain access to a few things, namely extra attack, so we can attack twice in one turn, or throw things twice in one turn. We're going to get a bit of extra movement speed. We also gain Boot of the Giants, allowing us to push a target away in a similar way to a shove, but it also does our strength unarmed strike damage, using our strength modifier, which is doubled thanks to Tavern Brawler. So, and it also does depend on our athletics to succeed, which is why we had to get athletics earlier. It also works better if you are hidden or invisible, so maybe you want to pair this up with someone who can turn you invisible. Up to you. But otherwise, it's a pretty fun ability. It does have some interesting synergy with certain pieces of equipment because it is considered an unarmed strike, but we can talk about that a bit later. And at Barbarian level 6, we're going to gain access to Elemental Cleaver. For 10 turns, we can charge a weapon that we have with elemental energy of our choice, that being acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage. I would personally be picking lightning for this build. And it also the weapon gains the thrown property and returns to your hand if it is thrown. We don't actually need that last part since we're using the Null Runa, which gains that by default, but otherwise this will allow you to throw other weapons as well. Perhaps you want to do a dual wielder variant in which you can huck 2 different weapons, in which case that could be pretty fun. But otherwise, this is going to add extra damage to our attacks, which is nice. Now that we've gotten all the main stuff that I want from Barbarian, let's quickly jump over to Cleric. Now, you may be thinking, wait, isn't the whole point of the Origin and Companion builds the fact that you still use their original class? And yes, you would be correct. However, Ranger just didn't really do anything for this build. Having the early game stuff is kind of okay, like the Natural Explorer and the Favored Enemy, as well as the fighting style, dueling. It does kind of make throws a little bit better, it does add that extra little bit of damage, but it honestly didn't feel that great. What did feel great, however, was 2 levels of Tempest Cleric. Tempest Cleric is going to give us access to Wrath of the Storm, giving us a reaction-based attack to retaliate against people who attack us, either attacking them with 2 to 16 lightning damage or 2 to 16 thunder damage, in which they have to make a saving throw to succeed and take only half damage. Overall, it's just a fun extra little bit of an attack, like we are this volatile raging storm, and anyone who comes near us and tries to attack us is gonna take damage in return. It's also gonna give us access to a few things like heavy armor proficiency, which unfortunately we can't use as a barbarian, but it is there just in case. We also gain access to Thunderwave and Fog Cloud, but we're not really going to be using those either. What we do gain access to, though, is some cantrips, and we do already have Thaumaturgy, so we don't need to pick that up here, but otherwise we can grab Resistance, Guidance, and then a third cantrip of our choice. Anyway, none of these are really great. We could just grab Light, because technically since Minsc is human, he actually can't see in the dark, so Light, I guess, makes sense. For our deity, it doesn't really matter, we're mainly just taking this here for the abilities, but if you want to say that maybe like some divine intervention has come along since Minsc went to that other plane, entirely up to you, but I think Talos works as like we are just this chaotic and destructive force of nature, so we can go with that. We are going to gain some extra skill proficiencies. I would recommend taking Insight and Medicine. I think Medicine makes sense for the Ranger stuff. And I like the idea of Minsc having a decent Insight as well. I don't know why. It just feels like he's smarter than he lets on. And then finally, we do get to choose a spell of our choosing here. And we're going to go with Sanctuary. Not to cast it on us. No. We live for the fight. This is to cast on Boo, so that nobody dares touch our lovable companion, because let's be honest, as great and powerful as Boo is, he does like to retreat from a battle after a couple of hits, so Sanctuary will keep him around a little bit longer for moral support, and not much else. Moving on to Cleric level 2, we're going to gain access to Destructive Wrath. Whenever we roll for thunder or lightning damage, we can spend a Channel Divinity point to deal maximum damage instead. Now, this is a pretty fun feature. I've been able to use this to get upwards of 32 damage on our Wrath of the Storm feature, retaliating with a lightning strike on a wet enemy. So basically dealing the maximum amount of damage possible on the roll, 16, and then doubling that with the wet condition. So it does work. And with this build and the equipment we'll be using, we'll be able to do this twice per short rest, which feels pretty nice as a pretty consistent utility tool in combat. But overall, it's not 100% necessary to the build. We do obviously get another spell to use at this point as well. I like the idea of having a healing word just to quickly give Boo a little bit more, or like the better idea would be to get Create or Destroy Water to be able to make enemies wet so they're vulnerable to lightning damage. This is most likely what I would use. However, there are other options for 1-level dips here. If you really want to keep Minsc as a ranger in some shape or form, you can grab a level 1 dip of ranger, although it's not going to do much for you. A level 1 dip into fighter would give you access to a fighting style, grab the dueling style, and get that +2 damage on all of your throw attacks. There's also Monk, which will actually make our Boot of the Giants a Monk attack, meaning that it works with a 1d4 plus our doubled strength modifier from Tavern Brawler, rather than just being our strength modifier, so that technically does give that a bit more power. It's entirely up to you if you want to throw another level or something in here, but I think I'll just keep this one simple today, and keep that second level of Cleric, gaining access to Create or Destroy Water and Sanctuary, because both of these are quite useful for the build, both for damage and utility. And also, Boo is very, very important to us. We must keep him safe. Let's head back over to Barbarian now and grab Feral Instinct, meaning that we cannot be surprised and gain a +3 bonus to initiative rolls. So even with our middling dexterity, we can still get up to kind of the middle to high tier of the initiative order. At Barbarian, level 8, we're going to get our second feat of the build. And I would say at this point, you got a choice. You can max out your strength, which is personally what I did for my testing and worked pretty fine, but I could see a lot of people wanting to use this build with the potions of Hill Giant Strength anyway, because, you know, then you could throw more things. But otherwise, it's entirely up to you. You can just max out your strength here. The other options that I touched on are Great Weapon Master, since we can wield the trident with 2 hands, allowing us to gain even more damage on our regular attacks as well. There is also access to, let's have a look, Mobile would be pretty good. Tough for even more HP could also be really, really nice. Savage Attacker, you've got a lot of options for good stuff here, but in my testing I did just take a strength improvement, but otherwise, feel free to play around with this. Moving on to Barbarian level 9, we're going to get Brutal Critical. Whenever we land a critical hit, we can roll an extra damage die in addition to the normal one. And finally, at Barbarian level 10, we get Mighty Impel. This is the suplex, allowing us to throw a creature or an object that is medium-sized or smaller. Heavier creatures and objects will deal more damage on impact. So we can either use this to suplex our enemies, tossing them across the battlefield, or use this as a bonus action throwing attack for our Nalruna, so we can throw 3 times in a turn, which is very, very strong. And that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this is a pretty standard throwing Barbarian build at the end of the day. I think patch 8 has made these fairly common, but I do think it has a nice bit of lore and flavour to it. I like the idea of Minsc getting his hands on this ultra-powerful weapon and using it to take down the Absolute that ended up controlling him, and temporarily dropping the Stone Lord moniker because it was used as a symbol of fear and taking up a new name for a symbol of hope. Like a Superman type deal. Maybe I'll use that to inspire the thumbnail. But anyways, we also do get some cool utility out of this, like Sanctuary if we need it, maybe for a setup round, or again to protect our lovable Boo. We're actually pretty decent as the face of the party if we need to be with intimidation checks, thanks to Thaumaturgy, guidance with some other stuff if Minsc ever ends up being the leader of a conversation, which he really shouldn't do. And we also have the ability to make our enemies wet. I mean, Minsc could probably do that anyway, but we didn't. But we kind of need Create or Destroy Water for the mechanical benefit. So we're going to be able to go ahead and, you know, inflict the wet condition, meaning that our lightning attacks are going to deal double damage when we boost them up with Elemental Cleaver for massive, massive damage. We're also going to gain access to a few extra abilities from our equipment, so let's talk about that now. I'm honestly surprised I was able to move past that last comment for that long. Oh dear. Anyways, moving on. So obviously our weapon of choice is going to be Vanal Runa. No early game equipment options today, as again, Minsc is a late game character. However, anything that deals with lightning charges or reverberation in the early game, like the Gloves of Belligerent Skies, will work pretty well. But anyways, Nal Runa. This is a pretty powerful legendary weapon. It's got a +3 enchantment on it, comes with an additional 1d6 thunder damage built in, and whenever the weapon is thrown, it will return to you and you cannot be forced to drop it. When thrown, the weapon will create an explosion that will deal 3 to 12 thunder damage in a 6-meter blast centered on the target. Now, this is a bit of a double-edged sword. You have to hit a target in order for that explosion to go off. You can't just throw it at the floor and have the explosion go off anyway. You do need to hit somebody, as well as this has no discrimination as to who it hits. Friend or foe, or even yourself, if you are in range of that 6-meter blast, you are going to be taking that damage. So exercise caution, as you're going to end up pissing off people you don't normally want to piss off. Which, I guess for Minsc, kind of makes sense. You also gain Veil of the Wind, giving you a +3 bonus to your movement speed and jump distance. And as well as equipping this weapon will give you permanent Feather Fall, giving you immunity to falling damage. It also glows with a bright light around you, so I guess taking the light cantrip was actually kind of pointless, but you know, what else were we going to take? This weapon also comes with 2 unique attacks. The first one being Zephyr Flash, which, for those of you who are Devil May Cry fans out there, is basically a version of Judgment Cut End, where you just get to dash between a bunch of people, hitting them at once, which I think is really, really cool. You rush forward, creating an air vortex that blasts foes and possibly inflicts bleeding. It deals 6d8 thunder damage, which is pretty powerful and can be applied with Destructive Wrath, giving us essentially a big dash across the screen thunder damage smite, which is really, really cool. You're going to be able to do massive damage with Destructive Wrath and this ability. We also gain Zephyr Break, which deals 66 thunder damage and a big gale of wind that can push targets at a certain distance and knock them off balance. Knocking someone off balance means that they will have disadvantage on strength and dex checks, and attack rolls against them will have advantage. Unfortunately, for some reason, this doesn't work with Destructive Wrath. Only Zephyr Break does. Zephyr Strike, I should say. Or Flash. God, Zephyr Strike is a tabletop spell. So you can use Zephyr Flash with Destructive Wrath, but not Zephyr Break. Don't know why, that's just how it is. But otherwise, this is obviously an amazing option for this build, and again, it has a fun, neat little story behind it for Minsc to follow. For our headpiece, I went with the Scabby Pugilist circuit just to have something a little bit different. Our weapon and unarmed strikes will deal an additional 2 damage while surrounded by 2 or more foes. So if we're really in the thick of combat, both our weapon attacks and our Boot of the Giants, as well as our Mighty Impel, will do a little bit more damage. But of course, most people will probably want to grab the Bone Spike Helmet, giving you access to menacing attack, allowing you to do a bit of extra damage, as well as potentially frighten targets, as well as whenever we rage, they must make a Wisdom saving throw, or take 2d8 psychic, or take 2d8 psychic damage, I should say, and you get a bump to your Intimidation. Obviously, the Bone Spike Helmet is better overall, but I always use it on my Barbarian builds, and hell, even some of my non-Barbarian builds, so I wanted to point out this other option that has some unique synergy with the build, but obviously the Bone Spike Helmet is probably better overall. Moving on, I can't remember if I've ever shown this off on the channel before, but it's something I overlooked for a long time because I didn't realize how good the ability was until I looked at it further, because I thought this applied the wet condition, but I must have got this confused with the joke item. But anyways, this is the Wave Mother's Cloak. During combat, once per turn, the cloak will grant water layer protection until the wearer takes damage. This will give you immunity to the burning condition, resistance to fire damage, but it will also make you vulnerable to lightning and cold damage. Apparently that's not true. What this actually will do is give you a +2 bonus to your armor class and saving throws each turn until you're hit, and that vulnerability isn't there. So in actuality, you can be pretty damn strong. I think this is why I kind of ignored this cloak for a long time, because the tooltip is a bit misleading, but on the wiki page it does seem to have the correct information. So the Wave Mother's Cloak is a pretty damn strong option here. Now, I originally went with something else, but in the end, the Bone Spike Garb felt the best, giving us a bit more tankiness when we rage with those 15 temporary hit points, and reduces all incoming damage by 2, which just makes us last longer in a fight. As well as, whenever we are struck by a melee attack, the attacker will take piercing damage equal to our Constitution modifier, in this case, 3. This just punishes our opponents even more for trying to attack us. We'll be able to tank the attacks ourselves, and then also deal a bit of piercing damage in addition to our Wrath of the Storm, which feels quite nice. Moving on to the gloves, of course, the gloves of Uninhibited Kashigo will allow us to deal an additional 1d4 damage with throw attacks and improvised weapons. And finally, the bone spike boots here will give us a +1 bonus to our armor class and saving throws, rounding us out to a 16, which isn't high, but we're not too worried about taking hits as a barbarian. As well as our jump distance is going to be increased, which feels nice pairing that with the Runa, and our high strength will be able to leap over tall buildings with a single bound. As well as we gain access to Brutal Leap, allowing us to, when we land on a target with this specific jump attack, we can possibly knock them prone. Prone means that they will basically have advantage on all attacks against them, and all of that. Like, it's a pretty damn powerful condition. Most people know what this does, so obviously we want to take advantage of it. Now, for our accessories, I've gone with the Amulet of the Devout. That +2 bonus to spell safety C is kind of useless here, and honestly, you can swap this amulet out for anything else, but I will point out that the extra usage of Channel Divinity here is amazing. It gives us 2 destructive wraths per short rest. Which is actually how it works, because as you can see, the description here, it says it comes back on a long rest, this extra Channel Divinity. That is not true. It also just comes back on a short rest, like the normal Channel Divinity, which is obviously not intentional, but let's be honest, it's probably not getting fixed at this point. There have been some patches that have been here since launch, some glitches that have been here since launch that haven't been patched since, well, launch, even though we're 8 patches in and multiple hotfixes, so I think this is probably here to stay. So overall, getting 2 destructive wraths is going to feel pretty damn good every short rest, so I thought this was a good one here, but if you're using this on another build of mine, as this one is pretty common across my videos, feel free to change it up for something else. Moving on, Ring of Flinging gives us an extra 1d4 to throw damage, so now 2d4 on every throw. And then finally, the Sparks Wall, making it so that we cannot be electrocuted and gain resistance to lightning damage. I think it just makes sense for us to have resistance to lightning damage, and if our lightning attacks on our wet surfaces do make those electrified surfaces, this means that we won't end up being electrocuted like our foes. Although this is mainly a holdover from my original vision for the build, which didn't end up working, but I'll discuss it now in case someone wants to try and make it work. That is the Lightning Charge variant. The idea was that we would create wet surfaces using, create or destroy water, and use the water sparklers in combination with these sparkling hands to gain lightning charges to bump up all of our attacks and gain some benefits. Unfortunately though, at the moment it seems like the water sparklers might be somewhat bugged. While they do create the electrified surfaces by standing on water, they don't seem to provide the lightning charges anymore. And they did work before, but they seem to have stopped working now as of patch 8, which is a bit of a shame. So if Larian could potentially fix that, that would be great, but otherwise I don't see that likely to happen. So unfortunately the water sparklers as they currently stand are not worth using on this build. I did originally think the Sparkle Hands might be a good idea, because whenever we hit with an unarmed strike, the wearer will gain 2 lightning charges. Of course, Boot of the Giants is an unarmed strike, so I thought it might be a fun and unique way to build up lightning charges. But unfortunately, our bonus action is just used up by too much stuff. We don't really get to use this very often, because we're either using our bonus action to rage or throw, and really, unarmed strikes, just to build a couple of lightning charges, just didn't feel great. So overall, this may have some more utility on the Great Weapon Master strategy, or maybe with some levels in Thief Rogue, but otherwise, it didn't really work out here. This was going to be combined with the Jolty Vest, meaning that whenever we have lightning charges, anyone who attacks us, again, kind of another punishment for attacking us, will have to make a dex save or become shocked, meaning that they cannot take reactions, and would also have disadvantage on ability checks and saving throws using dex, so it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Overall, and maybe with a different leveling scheme, I feel like this could work, but the water sparklers being bugged does kind of suck. But I could see a medium armor variant that uses the speedy Lightfoot, which would allow you to gain lightning charges on a dash, and obviously with our bonus action, cunning action, dash, we would be able to build that up pretty quick. So there's definitely like a speedster barbarian lightning build in here somewhere that uses these pieces of equipment, so if somebody wants to give that a go, feel free to do so. For our camp clothing, just to round out the build, we have the Fear Tailor's camp clothing mod once again, using the Seraphim clothing piece, which is kind of meant to be inspired by Jaheira, and I felt like it worked for Minsc, as well as the leather boots, coloured in the vanilla black and azure dye to kind of give this like black and blue, little bit of tinges of brown here kind of look for Minsc, which I thought looked nice. I think it kind of mimics his overall silhouette from his original armor quite well, while also making him look a bit more ready to go. You know what I mean? But yeah, overall, that is the build. A bit of a shorter video today. I'm still kind of experimenting with different video formats and such. Obviously, for those of you who saw my last video, thank you so much for the support you've been showing. Honestly, I was kind of overwhelmed overwhelmed by the amount of positivity that came out of that, and so I really do appreciate all of you coming through for me on that one, and I'm really looking forward to the direction this channel is going in the future. And overall, this is a fun build. Again, I never really knew what I wanted to do with Minsc as far as alternative builds for him. I was thinking of like, oh, maybe I could do like an evil Minsc build like I did with Jaheira, but Minsc just is an evil dude. Even when he was corrupted by the Absolute, he wasn't evil. His, like, goodness was just being manipulated by someone who was a shape changer. Otherwise, he was still, like, a good dude overall. And I don't think he's corruptible, man. I really, really don't. Maybe I'm missing something from Baldur's Gate 2. Maybe everyone who has played those older games is calling me an idiot right now and uncultured. But honestly, like, I love Minsc. I didn't think I could make him evil. So instead, I decided to make him Lightning Superman with a legendary weapon, and that felt pretty damn fun. So, for those of you who aren't aware, we've got a few more videos left to go before I take a bit of time off. The next one will be the Howson build, then one more Patron build, and then a final build, which I have talked about here and there on the channel before, but never really got around to making. But I think it'll be an interesting quote-unquote final video. It's not really final. I'm not going anywhere. I'm just starting a new age, and I wanted to cap it off this old era of the channel in a fun and interesting way, with a bit of a thought experiment / build video. So, I hope you guys look forward to that. But anyways, that is going to do it for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye.